Hey, welcome to the Complete Google Apps Script course. So this is going to be a new course where we're going to be demonstrating some of the amazing things you can do with Google Apps Script. My name is Lawrence. I'm going to be your instructor for this course. I come to you with many years of web development experience, and I'm ready to help you learn more about Google Apps Script. I personally have been using Google Apps Script for over 6 years, and it's by far one of my favorite programming languages. As well, I am a Google developer expert, and I'm really excited to be able to present this course to you, showcasing some of the most commonly used Google Apps Script services, such as Google Apps Script for Docs, Google Apps Script for Sheets. We're also going to be looking at Drive, Forms, Calendar, Gmail, and as well, I'm going to be presenting a number of code samples that you can use in order to really power up your G Suite, increase productivity, and connect the apps together for some really, truly amazing functionality. In the upcoming lessons, you're going to be able to explore how you can create, increase, and release the functionality that's contained within your G Suite of apps. So even if you've never used Google Apps Script before, or if you're already using Google Apps Script, this course is going to help you fine-tune your skills and get more familiar with what you can do with Google Apps Script. Google Apps Script is based on JavaScript, and now it packs even more power than ever before with an easier to use editor. We're going to also be highlighting some of the really nice features of the editor and that you can use in order to increase your productivity, do even more with code. It lists out all of the methods that are available. It's easier to create web apps, launch your web applications, whether you're creating a standalone script or a bound script. There's lots and lots of functionality to explore. And the nice thing about Google Apps Script, it works the way that you need it to work and the way that you expect it to work. And once you start coding with Google Apps Script, I guarantee you it will change everything. So all you need to have is a Google account, familiarity with JavaScript because it is based on JavaScript within the cloud, familiarity with writing code, and you're ready to go and start creating your own scripts with Google Apps Script. So let's get started. Hey, this lesson is going to be a quick overview of Google Apps Script, and then in the following lessons, we're going to get into more details on how you can create projects with Google Apps Script. So first of all, in order to start writing Google Apps Script, you do need to have a Google account, and there's more documentation about Google's Apps Script at developers.google.com/appscript. And as you can see, there's a number of different Google apps that you can bring in and that you can increase the power of these apps by writing additional code to them. The code is based on JavaScript, so it's very similar to JavaScript, but it's in the cloud, and it allows you to really power up the Google suite of apps. And predominantly there's Sheets, there's Docs, there's Slides, there's Forms, Drive, Emails, Calendars, and then there's a number of other Google apps that you can connect to. So you can build upon the existing Google suite of products, the G Suite of products, and extend on them. So there are two different types of Google apps that you can create. So you can create standalone scripts as well as bound scripts. So bound scripts are the ones that are bound to a particular type of app. So if we were to create a Google Sheet, and if we want to bind a script within the Google Sheet, we can do that under Tools. And there's going to be an option for Script Editor, and this will allow us to create a script. And so this is what's known as a bound script. And there are some features that you can do with the bound scripts, such as adding to the UI menu, and we are going to be looking at that in the upcoming lessons. And they are not available in the standalone scripts. So let's give this a name, and this is just a regular spreadsheet that I've created. And selecting the Script Editor, that's going to open up the Script Editor. And this is where I would be writing the Google Apps Script. So from here, you would give the project a name. So just call it Test 10 and rename it. And then we can save the project and we can update and add some code to it. And I'm going to be walking you through the interface coming up as well. So now when you go into your Drive, all you're going to see is that you've created a spreadsheet, and then within the spreadsheet, if you go to the projects, you can see that you've created a Google Apps Script within the spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet is going to act as a container within this bound script that's going to allow you to write code and enhance some of the functionality and also bring in other apps. So there is another option, and that is a standalone script. So you can go over to script.google.com, and from here you're going to have a listing of all of your projects, starred projects, all of your projects, the executions, the triggers. So there's a number of useful options here. And as well, you've got this option that says create or new project. So you can go ahead and click that, and that's going to open up the AppScript editor. And as you can see, it's the exact same editor as we see with the bound script. And this one is going to be a standalone script. So I'm going to just give it a name, and I'll just call it standalone 1 and give it a name. So you should always give meaningful names to your scripts, and that's going to help you when you are referencing back and looking back on them within your Drive or within your Google Script dashboard, and you're going to be able to find them a whole lot easier. So now when I've created this standalone script, so this one just lives on its own, and not to worry, we can still connect to spreadsheets, we can connect to the various G Suite products as well, the same way as we do with the bound script. And it's going to sit within your Drive as the script itself, because again, it doesn't have a parent container, and it's sitting within the Drive on its own. And as well, you can go into the Google AppScript dashboard and access the project. So that's the two different types of scripts that we're going to be creating in the upcoming lessons. So I do encourage you before the next lesson to go ahead and log into your Google account, and from there, go ahead and create either a spreadsheet or a doc and open up the script editor within the app. And as well, you can go to the Drive, and from here you can select Google Apps Script, and you can create a brand new standalone script this way, or you can go to the script.google.com, and from there you can just select new project and create a new script. So create a couple new script shells and save them to your Drive, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. We're going to get to scripting. Hey, I hope you had an opportunity to get to the script editor. So whether you're going through a bound script, so that's through the Google app, or whether you're just going as a standalone script through the Apps Script dashboard, I hope you had an opportunity to access the editor. And that's what we're going to be doing in this lesson. We're going to be walking through more of what is contained within the editor and how to use the editor. So this is a new editor version that's come out in 2020. So this is a brand new editor version, and it is a really nice update from the previous editor, and provides us a whole lot more that we can do with debugging. There's also the legacy editor. So that was the original version of the editor. So eventually you're going to be losing the option to switch back to the legacy editor, and this is going to be the only editor option. So let's give it a name. So that's one of the first things that you should do, is you should give your project a name. And the name is really important, because this is not only how you're going to find the script that's running, but you're also, when you're setting permissions for the script, that you're going to be able to reference back to what the script is and open it up. So that's why the name is really important. So there's a number of things that stand out here, and at any time you can rename the script. So just like any other G Suite product, you can go in the top right hand corner and you can rename what the name of the file is going to be, and then that's going to be reflected, of course, within your Drive. You've got a few options here as a quick kind of deploy option, where you can do a new deployment and you can manage existing deployments. You also have an option to share the project with others, and when you do share the project with others, if they do have access to it, then they are going to be able to look at the developer version, and you do need to have it shared to others in order for them to see the dev version, and the executable version you're going to set separate permissions for. There's also a support option. So what this does is this allows you for documentation, training, updates, terms of service. You can send some feedback. If you open up the documentation, that's going to bring you over to the developers.google.com, and this is actually the go-to place for all Google Apps Script stuff. There's a lot of great information, examples, source code, and just tons of great stuff. And also this samples is also at developers.google.com, and again, more information, script examples, code examples, and just different ways to do stuff. And there really is a lot of stuff that you can do. And then you've got the regular Google Apps and the account that you've signed in as. So up at the top left-hand corner, we've got the mini dashboard. So we've got an overview. So this will give us an overview of the project details. So this will give us information about the project, who the owner is, when it was created, when it was last modified, so on and so on, any execution errors. And this is actually brought in from, if you go into the info on the standalones or on the bound script, you're going to see that the script itself has a smaller icon, and that means that this is a bound script. So that's a quick way that you can tell between the difference between standalone and bound. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is as we go through the lessons, it's going to become more relevant to what type of script you're creating, whether it's a bound or a standalone script. So as you go through the projects, it's going to make a whole lot more sense later on. So this is just a quick overview of what's happening. There's the editor option. So this was the editor that we're on, and within the editor itself, you've got a quick icon menu here where you can undo, redo code, save. So these are typical things that you would expect. You can run the code, you can run as debug. So there's a slight difference between that. When you're running it on debug, you can have all the breakpoints set. So setting up a breakpoint there, and we need to create functions in order to run the functions. So we need to save this and create some type of code within the function. So let's go ahead and we're gonna do that. We're gonna create our first app script, and then we're going to run the script code so that we can get a feel for what can be done with Google Apps Script. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a document. So the my function, let's give it a new name, and that's the default function that they just give you a my function by default. So you can remove this, rename it, and add in new functions very easily. So the function is going to create a doc. So that's what the function is going to do. Let's set up an object that's going to contain, and this is going to be the main doc object. So the way that you reference the document object is it treat it as an object, and it contains a bunch of methods on it. So depending on what service you're using, and I do want to use the document app service. And this is another nice feature of the code editor, is that it gives this suggestion tool for the different methods that are created. So once you start typing, you're going to get this drop down and have all of the options that you have at that point. And this is also important to pay attention to, because this is going to make your job a lot easier. And sometimes it's important to understand what class you're on within the document so that you know which methods are available. So that's why that drop down is very essential when you are writing your code. So what we want to do is we want to write a method, and as you can see, again, the drop down provides us all the methods. So we've got create, get active document, get UI, open by ID, open by URL. So those are all the options on the base level of the document service using the document app class. So let's select create, and what the document app class does is it has a bunch of really good root methods that are available. So create, and what create will do is it requires one parameter, and that's just going to be the name of the document that we are creating. So test new doc, and I'll just call it test new doc 1. So we'll save it, and once we save the function, you've got the option there to hit save the project. And now you've got that option because this function is now registered, so we can run, we can debug, and if we have more functions, there's going to be more functions presented within the dropdown. I'm going to make the code editor bigger so that it's easier to read the code. Just increase the size of my browser size. So of course you don't have to do this if you're developing it yourself. I'm at 200%. This is just for the purposes of the video so that you can read the code that I'm writing a little bit easier. So it's got, whenever you hover over it, it tells us what the method does. So the document app create method is expecting a string parameter, and it creates and returns a new document. And the parameter, the name of the document's name. So in here they've got the document name, and then it returns the new document instance back to doc. So that allows us to select that object and do more with that object. So first, let's start by creating the new document. So what do you think is going to happen here when we run the function? Let's give it a shot, and we're going to run the function. So first thing that happens is that it's going to create a new document, but it's also going to ask you for permissions. So it's running the execution log. It's going to give you some details about what's happening, and it got triggered that authorization is required. So let's go ahead and review the permissions on the account. So select your Google account that you're going to be using. And then within here, it's going to tell you that the app isn't verified and Google reviewed the app. So it's going to give you a warning message, and that's obviously because we're just creating the app right now. And the name of the app is going to be where we're referencing the application within the Google dashboard. So that's why it's important to create a good name. So I've just got it as standalone to doc. So go ahead and click that. And then it's going to allow us to create the document. So just hit allow. And that's going to run the execution. And now when I go into the drive, it's created a brand new doc. So this is just going to be a blank doc. It's completely empty. There's nothing within it. So coming up next, we're going to continue to walk through the editor dashboard, and I'll give you some more information about what you can do within the dashboard. But before the next lesson, what I want you to do is create a function and select the document app class and create a brand new document within your drive. And you could be ready to move on to the next lesson. So how did it go? Were you able to create your document? This lesson, we're going to continue to look at the dashboard of the editor and go through some more options that we have. So we do have an execution log, so that will show you once again that last execution log. You can close that and open that. And then there's also going to be a drop down of the functions that you want to look at. And then if you select debug instead of run, so I'm actually going to update this to create a new document and give it a new name so that we have two separate name documents. And of course, within the Google Drive and within G Suite, you can have multiple documents with the same name, but this is just to avoid confusion. It automatically puts it on the root directory within the drive, so it's going to drop the next document within that same root directory. And there are ways with script in order to specify where you want the document to go, which we are going to be, of course, looking at later on. So let's try it with debug. And also, I have set a breakpoint within the debugger. So let's run that function. And the debug, what this does is this opens up the debugger. So it gives you the code, the variables, the values, the global values, the local values. So doc right now at this point, it's undefined because we've set the breakpoint, and that is just about to give a definition for doc, but it's assigning a value of the document app class object where it's creating the new doc, and it's got a breakpoint. So it's going to stop on the breakpoint. We can resume, we can step over the breakpoint, we can step in, and we can step out. So these are very useful tools when you are debugging your code. So let's go ahead and resume. So what's happening now is it ran, and it successfully ran the code. And you can see more information about the debugging. So when you do the debug, it will run it one more time. So you can continuously run the code when you click the start debugging. So that's the same option that you have up here. So now when I go into the drive, I've actually created two docs because I ran the debugger twice. So the debugger is different than the run because the run will just run the function. The debugger will open up the debug console and give you some more additional information on that. So within the triggers, if you have triggers, you can filter the various triggers that give you trigger information, who it's owned by, when it was last run, the deployment, the event, the function, the error rate. So right now we don't have any triggers set. So if you want to add a trigger, the add trigger button is down at the bottom right hand side. So you can click that, and that will give you all of the options for creating the trigger. So first we're going to have a listing of all of the available functions. And the idea for the trigger is to set a point where you want the application, the function to run. So we're selecting the function to run, and within the drop down, we've only got the one function currently within the code. So that's why that one's set by default. If you had more functions, you could select which function you want to run. There's also which deployment to run. So we only right now have the head deployment. So you can select various different deployments that you might have running within the code. And there's also the event source. So there's some options here. You can set it as a time driven or from a calendar. So if we set it as a time driven, that's going to allow us to select various times. And if we do from the calendar, that's going to update the next field. So let's go ahead and set it with the time driven. And within the time driven, we can specify a date and a time to run it. We can also run it on a minutes timer. And we can then, once we make a selection of the time-based trigger, when we want it to go off, we need to select, if we selected minutes, we need to select how many times we want to run it. So if we want to run it every minute, we can set that up to run it every minute. And then there's also the failure notifications. So these are really important because this will give you information. The idea with the triggers is to just let it stand and run the triggers. And if you are expecting a particular trigger to run and you want to get the error reports on the triggers, so usually I do select the notify me immediately, and that will immediately send you an email to the email Google account that you have on file and send you a notification that the trigger failed. You can also set these if you've got a number of triggers running and you want to get the notifications hourly, daily, or weekly. You can also set those as well. So once you've set up and configured the trigger, you can hit save, and that's going to add the trigger into your trigger and all of the trigger list. So you can have a number of triggers here. There's a number of pages you can have for this application. So it just shows you all of the triggers. And then here you've got an option to open up the editor once again, make some updates. And then here you've got options to delete the trigger, executions, failed executions, and just more product details. So we'll go back to this in a second, but let's go back to the executions. And here we can see how many times we've executed the code and what function was run and the different types of what executed the code. So here we've got the trigger that actually executed the code, and then these were the ones that we were executing the code within the editor. So now when I go back in, I've created a brand new doc, and this was run on the trigger. So if I go back to the triggers, I can see that the trigger was last run, it's time-based, and it's got 0 errors. So there's also project settings. So we're going to look more in that later on. But before the next lesson, go ahead and set up a trigger to run in your project. You can set whatever time-based, and then once your trigger runs, you can go ahead and delete the trigger. And this was just an example to get familiar with how the triggers work and how you can incorporate triggers to execute your code within your Google Apps Script. And coming up next, we're going to look at the project settings, and then we're going to get more into coding. Hey, did you get an opportunity to create a trigger and run the trigger within your Google Apps Script? So in this lesson, we're going to wrap up what we've got within the editor options and how we can create new files and different project settings. So under the quick menu on the left-hand side, you've got project settings. So if you open that up, that's going to give you all of the information about the project settings, and it allows you to, shows you to turn off the Chrome V8 runtime, and also exceptions within the Stackdriver. So these are just general settings. There's also the appscript.json manifest file. So if you're saving this and if you're deploying this as an add-on within your G Suite, then you want to show the manifest file, because that's a very important part of running and deploying the code. You can update that, set the permissions, and all the good stuff that you need to run within the JSON manifest. There's also the Google Cloud project. So by default, it's just set as Google Cloud project. And if you do want to create add-ons, then you do need to run this. So going into your Google Cloud platform, you need to go and get a project ID, and then you can use that project ID and add add-ons, and then that will run within the Google Cloud, and that's going to give you more information about when the scripts are being run. So you are going to need that as well if you're deploying it as an add-on. So talking about deployment, and just going back, once you check the AppScript JSON, if you go back to the editor option, you're going to have the AppScript JSON file there. And right now, it's just got the basic settings. So it's got the runtime version and the time zone, the dependencies, nothing is set. And you can set these and customize these for the add-ons. And I am going to have more information on this in the later lessons of this course. So you can also make a copy of it if you want. So if you make some adjustments and changes, make a copy before you do that, and you can always go back to your copy. There's also within the files where you can create a script file or you can create an HTML file. So with a script file, it's going to create another GS file, so another Google script file. And I'll just call it test. So once we save that, and that's going to start again off with the default my function. And the way that the Google script files work is you can have any number of these, and what it's going to do is it's going to run through all of them. So all of these are going to be together. So if you do have quite a bit of Google script code, you can break it apart this way and have different script files on the left hand side, and that's going to allow you to select and access the functions a lot easier. And I know that some of these codes do get quite long. You can also rename it at any time. You can make a copy of it, you can delete it, and as well you can move the file up. So the order of the files that they're going to run from top down. So if you want the test.js to run first, and you've maybe got some variables there, global variables that you want to set and you want to use within here, then you can move that up first and have that. So you might want to have something where you've got all of your variables set here and setting a bunch of global variables that of course you can make use of within the script. Let's set up a global variable. So just like JavaScript, we're going to define the variable, and I'll just call it val. And usually with global ones we use uppercase. And I'll call it test.doc3. And we're going to use that value of val, so that's now available globally. And because we're setting it up and defining it within test.js, we have access to it within the code.js. So this is one way that you can separate some of your logic and also create multiple files, just as you do with JavaScript in general. So now we're ready to run it, to try it out. So let's go ahead and run the function. So only on this Google script file, we've got the function. So that's why when we click test, we don't have any options for run or debug because there's no function listed there. And that's another way that you can separate out the different functions of the code. So now let's do a debug. And we can see within the variables, so we've got no breakpoints set. So I didn't actually set a breakpoint. So let's go ahead and set the breakpoint and run the debug again. So within the local variables, within the doc, it's undefined because we still haven't set the value. And within the script, the value for val has a string value of test.doc3. So now it's going to use that name in order to create the document. So if we go into the drive, there's our test.doc3 that we've just created. And it actually created it twice because remember we did run the script twice. So that's how you can create the files. Also an HTML file. So this is an HTML file, and I am going to be showing you how this works later on, of course, as well. And this is great for running web apps as well as for pop-up screens within the bound apps that you can run some HTML. So let's just do hello world. And this is going to run regular front-end code. So you can actually incorporate JavaScript in here. So let me set up the script tag first and run some JavaScript. So if we want to do regular console log, just as with any other front-end code, just to make sure you're writing the code properly, you could also add in styles. So let's select the body and set it to red. And then let's close off the script, the style tag. So now we've set up index.html, and I'll show you how you can run that in the next lesson where we can deploy it as a web app. So also within the files, so we've got the two options, script and HTML, and then there's also the services. So these are all of the services that are currently running our version. So if we want to have more advanced tasks, we can select from all of these advanced services, and you can also add in your own services by using the ID. And this is really good because this allows you to extend even more. You can do with the Google Apps Script, where you can easily connect to the YouTube data API, and you can select the documentation. You can get docs, slides, sheets, so you can attach to those APIs. There's also several other ones that are very useful, and you can bring these in easily into your project. So we've got an available versions, identifier, the different versions of the selected service, and then there's more information about the Cloud API. I'm not going to add any services, but the services option is there if you do need it. So lastly, and before we move on to the next lesson, we've got the deploy button. So this gives us an option for a new deployment or to manage existing deployments. So let's go ahead and do a new deployment. And we need to select the deployment type. So we've got 3 different deployment types. We've got a web app, we've got an API executable, or we've got an add-on. So those are the 3 options for the different deployment types. So if we want to just set up a web app, so this is just going to be our test app, and it's going to ask you a few options. Execute the app as, so who's executing the app, and because it's creating a web app URL, who has access to that URL. So if you are part of an organization, you're going to have an option to select anyone within the organization as well. So you're going to have 4 options there if you're creating the app script from an organization account. So if you set it to anyone, even anonymous, that means that anyone, even without a Google account, can go to the URL and run the code, and the code is going to be run as your Google account. If you select anyone, that means that anyone that's logged in. There's also the option, the organization, so anyone with an organizational within the G Suite organization email will be able to see it. And then here it's only yourself, so you need to be logged in with your account in order to see the content of the web URL. So I'm going to select it as anyone, even anonymous. And I do need to shrink the screen down in order to get the deploy button there. And you can also see the past deployments. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. And what this is going to produce, it's going to produce a deployed URL. So this is an executable URL, and you can also copy that. So if I select that and if I open it up within a new browser window, I'm going to get an error that says doGet is not there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next lesson. So what I want you to do now is go ahead, create a GS file, just set any global variable that you want, and then use that variable within another GS file and create a document, or also if you're familiar with Google Apps Script, you can run some other code and just use that variable. And with the index file, I'm going to be talking more about that in the upcoming lesson. Hey, this lesson is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to be deploying a web app. So in the last lesson, showed you how you can create files, but we created an index file and then we deployed a web app. And when we go to the executable URL, it says script function not found, doGet. And that's because there are some predefined functions, so it must include, so the HTML service must include doGet function to tell the script to serve up the page. There's also doPost, and of course more on that later on. So let's go back into our Google script, and we're going to create a function called doGet. And again, let me make the screen size bigger to 200%. And now we've got our doGet function. And this is going to be the function that's going to serve the HTML. So it's an HTML service within the Google Apps script. So it's within the user interfaces. If you're looking for more documentation on it, you can go to create script and serve HTML. So there's a number of options how to serve that. And using doGet gives you the core option to run the client-side code, which is sitting within the index.html. So let's set that up, and what we want to do is we want to return back some HTML code, and the HTML code is going to get rendered out by the HTML service. And what the HTML service does is you can see there's a number of options for the HTML service. So it can create HTML output, also create HTML output from a file, create a template from a file. So let's first try the HTML output, and we'll just type in hello. And it's expecting HTML code here, so we can return it back as a string value. And then later on, we're going to put the index file there. So now we've got the doGet. So we go back to the page, and oh no, we're still not running doGet. And that means that every time we're updating, and because we're looking at the executable code, that means that we need to redeploy it in order for it to render out the changed code. There's also a development version. So when you go to manage your deployments, you can see that you've got your few options here. So you've got the executable, and you've also got a dev version. So for the dev version, and again, I'm making the screen a little bit smaller so that we can see all of the content here within the pop-up window here. So the deployed URL is the one that when we redeploy it, then that's going to propagate the updates to it. But we also have an option to test the code. So we don't have to deploy on the deployed URL, and we can test the code. So anyone that is the project is shared to is going to actually have access to that URL. And then we can also update who we're executing at and who has access to it. So let's make our screen once again big to 200% for the code, and then we're go out to the dev version. In the dev version, bunch of different characters here, so these are all unique values, and in order for accessing the web URL, so just as this is a unique value, so look at what the last part of the value is, where you've got the whatever you've got after the /. So the executable is the one that's the live version, and then the /dev is the one that's the temporary version. And on the temporary version, or the development version, we've got hello being output there, and here until we redeploy it. So we can always redeploy it, and just hit deploy again. So that will redeploy it. You've got an option to click and copy the deployed version or test the latest version. So let's see what happens now. So now when I refresh it, and let's actually do a new deployment. So we'll call it test2 and run it. So it's going to be run on the same URL. And now we get the hello being output on the screen, just as the dev version. So whenever you do make changes to the code, if you do want your executable version, your live version to get the changes, then you have to redeploy it. And whereas if you update code here, so if I was to add a 2 within the hello world, it's going to show on the dev version. And just as the name indicates, of course, that is for development, and the executable is the one that you'd be sharing live. So we saw that we've got this option for the code. And if we want to, I'm just going to rename it because the do-get is the one that the function that is always going to output the content. So let's create another do-get. And in this case, we're going to use the index.html. So we've got the return HTML service. And this time what we're doing is we're going to create an output from file. And the file is going to be within a string value name. And it's going to create HTML output from an object from a file in the code editor. So that means that we're selecting this file and it's going to render out the code. And just as it returned creating the output, it's going to create the output from the file by reading the file contents and allowing us to render it out. So there's our updated file contents. And of course, the executable still hasn't got the changes. So when we open this up, we've got the executable content, and let's select it, Hello World 2. Also update the style, background color, set it to red, and now let's try it out. So the development version, it's running the style sheet, so background color of red. Let's open up the DevTools code inspector, and we see that we did get the output of test, and that's coming from the JavaScript where we've got the console message. So let's make a few updates to this and try it out one more time. And just make sure that it is working. So background color of blue, test is out there within the console. And now let's do a deployment of the code. So we'll deploy it as test3 and deploy it. So we're going to update the executable version. So let's now go back out to the executable version and see that we got a URL now that we can share with the world that has a blue background, a hello world of 2. And now if you were to make updates to here, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the executable is going to update, even though this is a separate index file? We know that the developer version is going to update, but what do you think is going to happen here with the executable version? Let's refresh and find out. So that stays the same because we haven't deployed it. So any changes within the code, even if it's within the HTML file, that it's rendering that new HTML file version out. So that's where we need to make sure that if we want the changes to take place, that we do render them out. And then I'm going to open up the DevTools, just make sure that we did the console message of test2. So whenever you make changes to the files and you want the executable version to get those changes, then don't forget to redeploy it. So go ahead, try this out. And this is actually one of the most asked for things that I get quite a few of the students asking me about how to create a simple web app and within the Google Apps Script. And this is really fairly straightforward, where we create a doGet function, and we can create an index.html file. We can create any number of HTML files and link those together, returning back the content from the client side and rendering it out within the web browser. And that gives you a URL that you can share with others. And you can also restrict how it gets shared. And that's done within the deployment, where we select how we want to deploy it. And I usually just leave the code to execute as this account. If you don't, then anyone accessing it was going to ask to log in on their account if they're not logged in, and then also who has access to it. So this can restrict who is accessing your web URL. So you can put some information in there and select who has access to it. So go ahead and do that and set that up and create your first web app. And you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. So try it out, get familiar with it, and I've got a lot of really good stuff, projects, and everything coming up in the upcoming lessons.